Hey, welcome in everyone. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
San Diego was pushing 95 degrees that afternoon, and I was the only person on that private stretch of beach wearing a long-sleeve shirt. The Reed family had rented out a section near La Jolla Shores, the kind of place where the sand is groomed, and the umbrellas match the catering company's logo. My mother said it was a simple family getaway. Simple in our house meant imported sparkling water and a photographer just in case. I stood near the edge of the shade sleeves pulled down to my wrist collar, high against my neck. Sweat slid down my spine, but I didn't adjust the fabric. I'd learned to tolerate worse. Jessica, on the other hand, had chosen a red bikini that looked like it had a sponsorship deal. She walked across the sand like it was a runway. A few young Navy officers, fresh uniforms, fresh confidence hovered nearby. Some of them I recognized from base events years ago. Most of them pretended not to recognize me. God, Elena Jessica called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you allergic to sunlight now? A few of her friends laughed. They were the polished kind PR consultants, defense contractors' daughters, people who used the word networking like it was a moral virtue. I'm good, I said. Thanks for checking. She tilted her head, smiling the way she does when she smells blood in the water. You know it's a beach, right? Not a monastery. I took a sip of warm bottled water and didn't answer. Silence bothers Jessica more than insults ever could. My father, Colonel Reed, retired, but still walking like the ground owed him respect. Stood a few feet away talking about standards and discipline to a lieutenant who looked about 12. He glanced at me once. Just once. His eyes paused on my sleeves, then moved on like I was a misplaced beach chair. Jessica drifted closer. I could smell coconut sunscreen and expensive perfume. She leaned in and lowered her voice just enough to make it seem private. You could at least try not to look like a walking HR complaint. I'm not applying for anything, I said. Oh, honey, that's obvious. More laughter. Someone opened a cooler. Ice cracked. Music started playing from a portable speaker, something upbeat and forgettable. Jessica stepped behind me. I knew that shift in her energy. I've known it since we were kids, and she'd smile right before pushing me into a pool. Maybe she's hiding a secret, one of her friends said playfully. Tattoo's ex-boyfriend's name. Jessica's fingers hooked into the collar of my shirt before I could move. It happened fast, a sharp tug. The fabric stretched, then slid up over my shoulders. Gasps don't sound dramatic in real life. They're small, quick, like someone sucked in air and forgot how to let it out. The sun hit my back. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't need to. I knew what they were seeing. Scars layered across my shoulders and down my spine. Thick, pale lines cutting through old burn marks. Small circular pockmarks near my left shoulder blade. One long, jagged seam that ran diagonally like someone had tried to unzip me and failed. The beach went quiet in that strange way crowds do when they're not sure whether to stare or look away. Jessica burst out laughing. Oh my God, she said loud and bright. I forgot how bad it looks. She stepped to my side so she could see my face. Guys, these are from her being clumsy. You know how some people trip over nothing? Elena takes it to a whole new level. A few nervous chuckles. One of the lieutenants shifted his weight. Another stared too long before snapping his gaze back to the ocean. Remember when she left the service, Jessica went on. Early discharge. Super mysterious. We were all so worried. She put a hand dramatically over her chest. Turns out it's just this. She gestured at my back like she was presenting damaged goods at an auction. The pride of a military family, she said. Reduced to a walking accident report. I bent down, picked up my shirt from the sand, and pulled it back over my head without rushing. My hands didn't shake. I made sure of that. You're unbelievable, she said, almost disappointed that I wasn't crying. No, I replied. I'm just warm. That got a few awkward laughs. Not from her friends, from the officers. Humor makes people feel safer when they don't know what side they're on. Jessica rolled her eyes. You know what's really embarrassing? Dad gave 30 years to the Navy. I'm building an actual career in it. And you, she shrugged. You quit, and now you hide. There it was, the real target. Not the scars, the discharge, the silence. She leaned closer again. You're the only Reed who couldn't handle it. My father cleared his throat but didn't step in. He adjusted his sunglasses instead. I looked at Jessica. Really looked at her. Perfect hair, perfect tan, perfect public narrative. You ever think I said calmly that not everything is for public consumption? She blinked. Oh, please, Don't start with that dramatic secrecy stuff. If it mattered, we'd know. That was the problem. In this family, if it wasn't framed, applauded, and posted, it didn't exist. One of her friends tried to change the subject. Jessica, weren't you telling us about the fleet anniversary gala next week? Jessica lit up immediately. Yes, I'm coordinating the whole thing. Pacific Fleet leadership will be there. Real heroes. She emphasized the last two words and gave me a look. I turned toward the water before I said something that would ruin the catering deposit. That's when I noticed him. An older man standing near the dunes, slightly apart from the crowd, not dressed like a beach guest. Navy blazer despite the heat. Posture straight even at his age. He wasn't looking at Jessica. He was looking at me. More specifically at the area just above my left shoulder where the fabric had shifted before I pulled it down. A small faded tattoo sits there. Most people think it's random ink. It isn't. His hand trembled. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. He took one step forward, then stopped as if he wasn't sure whether he had the right. Our eyes met. There was no confusion in his face. No curiosity, recognition. Jessica was still talking behind me about media coverage and honor and serving the narrative. The officers nodded politely. My father laughed at something I didn't hear. The older man didn't smile. He looked like someone who had just seen a ghost walk out of the ocean. And for the first time that afternoon, I felt the heat for a different reason. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been the one who stayed quiet to protect something bigger than yourself, only to be called weak by people who've never carried that weight? If you've ever had your silence mistaken for failure, tell me in the comments. I want to know how you handled it. I kept my eyes on that older man until Jessica's laughter swallowed the moment, and he stepped back into the crowd like he'd never been there. That night, I sat at the far end of our parents' dining table, the one made of dark oak that my mother polished like it was a family member. The Reed house overlooks the water, all glass walls, and framed commendations. My father's medals hang in the hallway. Jessica's framed press releases are in the study. There is nothing on the walls with my name on it. Dinner was grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, and whatever tension hadn't burned off in the sun. Jessica was glowing, not from the beach, from the audience. So the Admiral's office personally thanked our team, she said, swirling her wine like she'd negotiated a peace treaty. They said the coverage improved public confidence by 12%. My father leaned back in his chair, nodding with approval. That's impact. That's how you serve beyond the battlefield. Jessica smiled modestly. She practices that look. And the fleet anniversary gala next week, she continued, is going to be the most polished event they've had in years. Senior Command Defense Partners Media. It'll set a new standard. It already has, my father said. You understand optics, strategy, messaging. That's modern warfare too. I cut into my fish and didn't comment. I've learned that when my father uses the phrase modern warfare, he means whatever makes Jessica look impressive. My mother glanced at me briefly. Elena, how's the marina? She always says it like she's referring to a temporary illness. It's fine, I said. 2 engines came in this week, saltwater damage, both running again. Jessica gave a soft laugh. Riveting, it pays, I replied. My father didn't look at me. You had potential, he said. Still facing Jessica. You were strong in logistics, technical systems. It's a shame you never followed through. There it was, the sanitized version. 5 years ago, I left the Navy with an honorable discharge and a medical file thicker than my patience. Official reason classified reassignment concluded medical complications. Unofficial family interpretation, she couldn't hack it. I've never corrected them. Jessica took a bite of her food and chewed slowly, enjoying the silence. Well, she said, not everyone is cut out for pressure. I set my fork down carefully. Pressure isn't the issue. She raised an eyebrow. Then what was... I looked at her for a second longer than usual. Some things aren't mine to explain, she snorted. That's convenient. My father's jaw tightened. Your sister is building credibility inside the Navy. Real credibility. You left. Whatever your reasons were, you don't get to sit back and critique. I didn't critique, I said evenly. You implied it, Jessica cut in. On the beach, about public consumption. If you're suggesting I fabricate anything, I didn't say that either, but you meant it. I leaned back in my chair. If the shoe fits. The air shifted. Jessica's eyes sharpened. You have no idea what it takes to shape public perception, to protect the institution. Protecting it, I said, and polishing it aren't the same thing. My father's hand hit the table, not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough to make the glasses rattle. You do not, he said slowly, lecture someone who is actively serving this country. I met his eyes. Finally, I did serve. You left, he snapped. Early, under circumstances you refused to clarify. Your sister is still in the fight. There's something almost impressive about how cleanly he erases 5 years of my life. Jessica folded her hands like she was moderating a panel discussion. Actually, she said lightly, I have some news. Of course she did. The Admiral's office recommended me for promotion, she announced. Senior Communications Strategist. Effective next quarter. My mother gasped softly. Jessica, that's wonderful. My father stood up halfway from his chair before sitting back down again, overwhelmed with pride. That's my girl. Jessica looked at me. I guess hard work pays off, she said. What was the project that tipped it? My father asked eagerly. She smiled. The Pacific incident last spring, the crisis briefings. I drafted the narrative that stabilized the story before it escalated. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The Pacific incident. Radar blackout, operational silence. No official public details released. Jessica continued, there were complications, potential losses. But thanks to our messaging, confidence never dipped. Our messaging. I stared at my plate. That operation, I said carefully, wasn't something you experienced firsthand. She shrugged. I don't need to be on a ship to manage information. That's not what I meant. She tilted her head. Then clarify. I chose my words. Be careful claiming ownership of things you weren't part of. Her smile disappeared. I was part of it, she said sharply. The public-facing side. You weren't there, and you were, she shot back. Silence. My father looked between us. Enough. Jessica leaned forward. You don't get to question my integrity, not when you walked away. I held her gaze. Integrity isn't about who gets the credit. My father slammed his hand down again, harder this time. A fork clattered to the floor. You have no standing to preach about integrity, he said, voice rising. Your sister is dedicating her life to service. You fix boat engines. There it was. The official ranking system of the Reed household. Military PR strategist. Retired colonel. Socially strategic mother. Mechanic. I bent down, picked up the fork, placed it back on the table. I fix systems, I said calmly. Engines mostly. Sometimes things people assume are beyond repair. Jessica let out a dry laugh. Wow. Deep. My father stood up fully this time. Until you're wearing the uniform again, you don't lecture someone who is contributing. I looked at him steadily. Contribution doesn't always come with applause. Don't romanticize failure, he snapped. Failure. 5 years of silence reduced to one word. Jessica reached for her wine and took a slow sip. Maybe if you'd stayed, she said, you'd understand what real pressure looks like. I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I understand pressure better than anyone at that table. I understand the kind that doesn't come with press releases. The kind that doesn't fit into a gala speech. The kind that leaves marks. But I also understand something else. Sometimes the people who shine the brightest in public are standing on foundations built by someone who agreed to stay invisible. And invisible doesn't mean insignificant. I drove back to the marina the next morning before the sun burned through the fog, needing the sound of tools instead of voices. The marina sits on the quieter side of the bay. No photographers, no catered lunches. Just chipped paint gulls fighting over scraps and engines that don't care about your family name. I was halfway inside a diesel compartment when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I ignored it. When it buzzed again, I slid out on the creeper and checked the screen. Unknown number. I almost declined it. Almost. Yeah, I answered. Is this Elena Reed? Depends who's asking. My name is Mark Dalton. I'm calling regarding an outstanding balance connected to a co-signed account. I leaned against the hull. I don't co-sign anything. Ma'am, your name is listed as secondary guarantor on a private line of credit. Opened 18 months ago? That got my attention. What kind of credit? I asked. High-limit lifestyle financing. The primary account holder is Jessica Reed. Of course she is. I didn't sign anything, I said flatly. There is documentation, he replied. Electronic authorization. I closed my eyes for a second. Jessica has many talents. Subtlety is not one of them, but manipulation. That's a hobby. I'll need copies, I said. Everything. We can forward the documentation to your email. Do that. I hung up and stared at the boat in front of me. The engine parts were lined up neatly, predictable, logical. If something breaks you, trace the cause. Families aren't built that way. An hour later, the documents hit my inbox. My name was there, digital signature, date stamp, consent language. The signature looked like mine if you glanced quickly. If you didn't know how I loop my R's. The debt wasn't small. It wasn't missed a few payments small. It was sell a house small. Luxury travel, designer purchases, event hosting expenses, private club memberships, charges that screamed image management. Jessica didn't just live well, she lived expensively, and she'd used my name as backup collateral. I printed everything and drove straight to my parents' house. My mother answered the door. She looked surprised, which told me she wasn't expecting me yet. "We were just about to call you," she said carefully. "That's convenient," I replied, walking past her into the foyer. Jessica was already in the living room, laptop open, phone in hand. My father wasn't home. "Perfect," Jessica said brightly. "We were hoping you'd stop by." I laid the printed documents on the coffee table. "Explain." Jessica barely glanced at them. "It's temporary. You forged my authorization." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. It was a shared family credit extension." "I don't share credit extensions." My mother stepped in quickly. "Elena, sweetheart, we didn't want to burden you. It's just cash flow timing. Jessica has professional obligations. Appearances matter in her field. Not at my expense." Jessica closed her laptop and leaned back. "You weren't using your credit. That's not how consent works." She waved a hand. "You're not exactly building an empire." I let that pass. "How much?" I asked. My mother hesitated. Jessica didn't. "About 800,000. The number hung in the room like a bad smell. "You owe nearly $1 million, I said slowly, "and you thought looping me into it without permission was acceptable. It's strategic," Jessica snapped. "I have promotion momentum. Once that's locked in, bonuses increase. Media exposure increases. Speaking fees. It snowballs, and if it doesn't," she didn't answer. My mother cleared her throat. "There is another solution." "Of course there is." She pulled a folder from the side table. "Legal documents, property transfer forms, the beach house, our grandfather's house, the one place in this family that doesn't feel staged." "You want me to sign over my share?" I said. "It simplifies liquidation," my mother replied quickly. "We can sell it, cover the debt, protect Jessica's career before any creditors escalate. And my half?" "You don't need it," Jessica said. "You live in a rental near a boatyard." I stared at her. "That house isn't an asset to me," she continued. "It's sentimental clutter." "To you," I said. She shrugged. "Grow up." I flipped through the paperwork. There it was. Clean, efficient. If I signed, they could list the property immediately. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. Jessica's jaw tightened. My mother stepped forward, softer now. "Elena, we're trying to prevent embarrassment. If creditors start digging, questions will come up. About accounts. About history." "Whose history?" Jessica reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. Photos of my back, from the beach, zoomed in. "You see what I see?" she said sweetly. "Unstable behavior, self-inflicted trauma, early discharge, refusal to explain circumstances. It's not hard to build a narrative." My stomach didn't drop. It went still. "You're threatening to declare me mentally unfit," I said. She tilted her head. "I'm protecting the family, with lies, with strategy." My mother spoke carefully. "If there were concerns about your mental stability, it could complicate property ownership. A court might appoint oversight. You're suggesting I'm incompetent." "I'm suggesting," Jessica said, "that those scars tell a story. And if you won't tell it, someone else can." There it was, the escalation. "You're going to tell a lawyer I hurt myself," I said. Jessica didn't flinch. "I'm going to tell them you were unstable before you left the service. That's why you won't talk about it." I stepped closer. "You have no idea what you're touching." She smiled. "Neither do you." I gathered the papers calmly and put them back in the folder. "I'm not signing anything today." Jessica's expression hardened. "Elena, don't be difficult." "Difficult would be reporting identity fraud," I said. "This is restraint." I walked toward the door. "Think about your future," my mother called after me. "I am," I replied without turning around. Back at the marina, I worked until my hands ached. Metal doesn't manipulate you. It either functions or it doesn't. Near closing time, one of the dock workers handed me an envelope. "Came for you," he said. No return address. It was black. No stamp. No postage mark. Someone had delivered it by hand. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. One sentence. "The tide is rising, Hawk." I didn't breathe for a second. Hawk. No one here knows that call sign. No one in my family knows it. Only a handful of people ever did. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Jessica thinks she understands leverage. She doesn't, because if the tide is rising, it's not coming for me. I read that sentence 3 times under the marina lights before folding the note and slipping it into my jacket. 3 nights later, I stood in the service corridor of the Pacific Fleet Anniversary Gala, wearing a black catering uniform, with my hair pulled tight at the back of my neck. Jessica had called me personally. "You want to understand hard work," she'd said. "Come help at the gala. Maybe it'll remind you what contribution looks like." I knew it wasn't about labor, it was about positioning. The event was held at a waterfront hotel overlooking the bay. Flags lined the entrance. A string quartet played near the main ballroom doors. Officers in dress whites moved through the lobby like polished statues. Civilian guests floated beside them in gowns and tailored suits. Inside the service hallway, everything smelled like starch and ambition. A catering manager handed me a tray of champagne flutes. "Keep moving, smile. Don't engage unless spoken to." I almost laughed. That part I've mastered. When the ballroom doors opened, light spilled across marble floors and gold-trimmed tables. Giant screens displayed historic fleet footage. Headlines scrolled across the edges of the room, celebrating milestones, missions, public trust. Public trust. Jessica stood near the stage in a sleek navy dress headset tucked discreetly behind her hair. She looked like she owned the air supply. She spotted me within seconds. Our eyes locked. She smiled. Not warm, strategic. I stepped into the room tray balanced evenly in my hands. Conversations flowed around me. Pacific readiness metrics have never looked stronger. Media response time has improved dramatically. Communications has been stellar this year. Jessica drifted between groups like a tour guide of manufactured heroism. A few faces turned toward me. Recognition flickered in some of them. One woman, early 30s, sharp features, defense communications badge, looked at my name tag. "Elena," she read. "You're Jessica's sister, right?" "Yes." She glanced at my uniform. "Career pivot? Something like that." She smirked. "We heard you left under complicated circumstances." I held her gaze. "Did you?" Her smile tightened. "Well, it's a small community." "It is." She took a champagne flute and walked away satisfied she'd delivered her message. I kept moving. Near the center of the room stood a cluster of senior officers. Admirals, commanders, faces I recognized from years ago, some older, some promoted. None approached me. That was fine. I wasn't here to be approached. Jessica tapped her microphone lightly and stepped onto the stage. "Good evening," she began smoothly. "Tonight we celebrate the strength, resilience, and integrity of the Pacific Fleet." Applause. She moved through her speech with precision. Strategic language, carefully framed accomplishments. Mentions of crisis navigation and decisive internal coordination. At one point, she referenced last year's Pacific Operational Challenge, praising the communications team for stabilizing public perception during a high-risk maritime disruption. High-risk maritime disruption. That's one way to describe a minefield. I kept my face neutral. After the speech, music resumed and servers moved through the room with trays. I navigated between conversations, refilling glasses, clearing empties. Then Jessica walked straight toward me. On purpose. She picked up a glass of red wine from another tray and joined me near the center of the ballroom where foot traffic was thick. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked quietly. "I'm working." "Good, it builds character." She looked me up and down. "You blend well," she added. "Almost invisible. That's usually the goal." She leaned closer. "You could have had this room, you know. I'm fine where I am." She smiled. "You shouldn't be." Her heel shifted. Her elbow moved. The wine tipped. It spilled directly down the front of my uniform. A full glass. Gasps again. Louder this time. Jessica jumped back theatrically. "Oh my God, Elena. What are you doing?" I stood still as red liquid soaked into black fabric. "You walked into me," she said sharply. Voice raised now. "Can you focus for 5 minutes?" The music faltered. Heads turned. The room went quiet in waves. "I was standing still," I said evenly. She laughed incredulously. "Of course you were. Just like you were standing still in your career." a few uncomfortable chuckles from the edges. She turned slightly so her voice would carry. I try to help you. I bring you here to learn. And you can't even manage a tray without causing a scene. I didn't drop the tray. She lowered her voice for half a second. Don't embarrass me. Then she raised it again. You know what the problem is, she said, projecting now. You've always been fragile. I felt every eye in the room. Physically, she continued, gesturing vaguely toward my back, and apparently mentally. A ripple moved through the crowd. I mean, look at you, she said. You left the service early, you hide behind long sleeves. You refuse to explain anything. And now this. She shook her head dramatically. You're a liability. There it was, the word, not sister, not veteran, liability. I set the tray down on a nearby table carefully. I'm covered in wine, I said calmly. Not incompetence. She scoffed. Don't twist this. I'm not. She stepped closer, anger flashing beneath the polish. You are a disgrace to this family, she said, voice sharp and clear. Dad gave his life to this institution. I'm building mine inside it. And you quit, you hide, you make us look weak. The word hung there, weak. She wasn't finished. You're damaged, she said louder now, inside and out. The ballroom felt smaller. Some of us actually have the strength to serve, she added. Not everyone survives the pressure. Survives. Interesting choice. I met her eyes. For someone who talks about service, I said quietly, you're very comfortable humiliating your own blood in public. She smiled coldly. Maybe if you had any honor left, I wouldn't have to. The anger in the room shifted. Not toward me, toward her. Because even in a room built on image, there's a limit. And she had just crossed it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood there, wine staining my uniform, and looked at her without flinching. And for the first time all night, she looked uncertain. I held her gaze without blinking, wine soaking into my uniform, while the room tried to decide who to side with. That's when the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Not dramatically, no music cue, just a shift in posture across the crowd. Conversations died mid-sentence. Several officers near the entrance straightened automatically. Jessica noticed the movement before I did. Her expression changed instantly. Anger wiped clean, replaced with polished enthusiasm. Admiral Sterling just arrived. Someone whispered. I didn't turn right away. I already knew the name. Vice Admiral Charles Sterling, Pacific Fleet Command Authority, decorated, strategic. Not a man who attends events unless there's a reason. Jessica's entire body language recalibrated. She smoothed her dress, checked her hair, and moved quickly across the ballroom, leaving me standing there with red wine down my front. Admiral Sterling, she called brightly, reaching him before anyone else could. What an honor. I'm Jessica Reed. I coordinated tonight's event. He stopped walking. He was older than most of the men in the room, but not fragile. Tall, straight-backed, eyes sharp and controlled. Jessica extended her hand with practiced confidence. It's such a privilege to finally meet you, she continued. We've worked closely with your office on communication strategy this past year. He looked at her hand, then at her face, then past her. He did not shake it. Instead, his gaze began moving across the room, slowly, deliberately, scanning. Jessica faltered but recovered quickly. We're incredibly proud of how we've shaped the narrative around recent Pacific operations. No reaction. His eyes kept moving, over the tables, over the officers, over the stage, until they landed on me. He went still, not surprised, certain. Jessica noticed the shift and glanced back over her shoulder. Oh, she said lightly, forcing a laugh. That's just my sister. Catering staff. He stepped around her, didn't acknowledge the introduction, didn't respond to the explanation. He walked straight toward me. The sound in the room dropped again, thinner this time. I stood where I was. He stopped 3 feet away. Up close, I could see it clearly, the same man from the beach, the same steady eyes, the same recognition. Jessica hurried after him, heels clicking against the marble floor. Admiral, I'm so sorry about that earlier scene, she said quickly. My sister had a minor incident with a tray. We'll handle it internally. He didn't look at her. His attention stayed on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He glanced at the wine stain on my uniform, then at my face, then almost subtly at the line of my shoulder where the fabric sat. He inhaled once, then he stepped back. The entire ballroom watched. Every officer, every civilian guest, every staff member frozen mid-task. He straightened fully, and then he snapped into a formal military stance. It wasn't casual acknowledgement. It wasn't polite respect. It was the highest ceremonial salute one officer can render in public outside of a battlefield commendation. His hand came up sharply. Perfect angle, perfect precision, dead silence. You could hear the faint hum of the air system. Jessica's smile collapsed. No one moved. No one understood. He held the salute for a full second, then 2, then 3, before lowering his hand with measured control. He spoke clearly enough for the room to hear. I have been looking for you for 5 years. The words hit the room like a shockwave. Jessica blinked. Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. He didn't even glance at her. His eyes remained locked on mine. 5 years, he repeated, without acknowledgement, without credit, without recognition. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not panic, not fear, something steadier. Jessica tried again, laughter strained now. Sir, I assure you my sister hasn't been affiliated with any fleet operations in years. He finally turned his head slightly. Correct, he said evenly. Because she was ordered not to be. That landed harder than any insult Jessica had thrown at me. A murmur spread through the room. My father, who had arrived late and was standing near the back, pushed forward through the crowd, confusion written across his face. Admiral Sterling, he began formally. If there's an issue with my daughter's conduct, there is, Sterling interrupted calmly. But not the one you think. Jessica's composure cracked. Sir, with all due respect, I coordinate public-facing initiatives for Pacific Fleet. If there's a concern, I would have been informed. You were not cleared for the operation in question, he replied flatly. Operation. The word rippled through the officers. Jessica swallowed. What operation? He stepped one pace closer to me. The room leaned in. My staff and I have searched extensively for the individual responsible for neutralizing the underwater detonation grid during the North Pacific blackout, he said, voice steady and unmistakable. A mission that prevented catastrophic fleet loss. No one spoke. No one breathed. Jessica's face drained of color. That individual, he continued, was designated call sign Hawk. The word hit me like cold water. He looked directly at me. I have been looking for you, he said quietly now. Though the silence carried it across the ballroom, Hawk. My father stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Jessica's lips parted slightly. This is absurd, she whispered. There's no record of there isn't Sterling cut in, by design. He shifted his attention briefly to the crowd. Certain operations remain classified, he said evenly, even from those who manage the headlines. That one landed squarely on Jessica. Then he faced me again. His voice softened, not weak, but personal. You disobeyed a direct extraction order to ensure the final detonation line was severed, he said. You sustained injuries that would have ended most careers, and you signed non-disclosure without hesitation. Every eye in the room moved to my back. Wine stain forgotten, scars remembered. You accepted honorable discharge under medical confidentiality, he continued, and you never sought recognition. I didn't speak. There was nothing to add. He took a slow breath. I have been looking for you for 5 years, he said again, steady and clear. Savior of the 7th Fleet. The phrase hung in the air. Savior. The same room that had watched me be called fragile and damaged was now standing in absolute silence. Jessica didn't look at me anymore. She looked like someone trying to calculate an escape route, and for the first time since this night began, I wasn't the one on display. She was. I didn't look at Jessica when the word savior landed in the middle of the ballroom like a live charge. Admiral Sterling turned slightly and signaled toward the stage. Microphone, he said. No one hesitated. Within seconds, someone handed it to him. The music had already been cut. The screens behind the stage were paused on a loop of polished fleet imagery that suddenly felt incomplete. He stepped up slowly, not rushed, not dramatic. Controlled. I did not intend to disrupt this event, he began evenly. But what I just witnessed requires correction. The room was silent in a way that didn't feel social anymore. It felt official. There was an operation in the North Pacific 5 years ago, he continued. It does not appear in public briefings. It does not appear in the official anniversary footage displayed behind me. And for good reason. He didn't embellish. He didn't posture. Our radar grid went dark for 9 minutes during an active fleet maneuver. Simultaneously, an underwater detonation network was triggered beneath a primary carrier group. A few officers in the room stiffened. Jessica stood frozen near the center aisle, hands clasped too tightly. The mines were not drifting relics, he said. They were synchronized, hardwired, designed to detonate in sequence. He paused just long enough for the math to register. If that grid had gone off, he continued calmly, we would not be celebrating tonight. The ballroom air felt heavier. Our primary dive unit was compromised during initial assessment. Visibility was near zero. Electrical interference made remote disruption impossible. He let that sit. So a technical operations specialist volunteered. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. She entered the water alone. My father's face had gone pale. She navigated a live detonation field manually. Sterling continued, identifying and severing trigger lines by touch. Someone near the back whispered, "That's impossible." He heard it. "It is highly improbable," he corrected. Which is why it worked. A faint ripple moved through the officer's recognition. Understanding. She disabled 7 primary triggers, 6 secondary links, and 1 failsafe sequence that had not been detected by our systems. 7, 6, 1. I hadn't counted them in years. Our extraction order was issued when a secondary charge activated unexpectedly, he said. She was instructed to surface immediately. His eyes shifted briefly toward me. She did not. The room held its breath. She remained until the final wire was cut. The silence turned dense. The detonation that followed was partial, he continued. A proximity blast from a triggered mine approximately 12 meters from her position. 12 meters. Close enough. Shrapnel penetrated her back and shoulder, he said. Concussion impact. Water displacement trauma. She lost consciousness underwater. My mother covered her mouth. I didn't look at her. She was recovered by secondary divers and transported under sealed classification protocol. He paused. No public citation, no press briefing, no ceremony. His voice hardened slightly. She signed lifetime non-disclosure. The ballroom shifted. Not socially, structurally. She accepted medical discharge to preserve operational secrecy, he said. She did not contest it. She did not seek compensation beyond what was mandated. She did not request acknowledgement. His gaze swept the room once, because her objective had never been visibility. Jessica's breathing had changed. Quick, shallow. Sterling lowered the microphone slightly and looked directly at me. The scars on her back, he said clearly, are not the result of clumsiness. He let that word hang deliberately. They are fragmentation patterns from a live mine detonation. The words landed like clean steel. I felt every eye in the room shift again. Not curious now. Corrected. She was the last person to leave the blast radius, he added. Because she ensured no one else would have to. No applause followed. This wasn't that kind of moment. This was recalibration. My father looked like he'd been physically struck. Jessica shook her head faintly. This is classified, she said weakly. There's no documentation. There is, Sterling replied calmly. Restricted documentation, he turned slightly toward her, which you were never cleared to access. The edge in his voice wasn't anger, it was finality. You built narratives around that blackout, he continued evenly. You managed public reassurance while someone else managed the explosion. That one cut. Jessica's mouth opened, then closed. Sterling stepped down from the stage, the microphone lowered but still live. Integrity, he said quietly, does not require an audience. Then he stopped in front of me again, up close, eye level. You stood alone in freezing water, he said. You did not panic. You did not withdraw. You completed the objective. His voice softened, not sentimental. Respectful. You were not fragile. I felt something settle inside me. Not validation, alignment. I did my job, I said. He nodded once. Yes, he replied. You did. He stepped back half a pace. You will no longer be mischaracterized under my command, he added. The sentence wasn't loud, but it carried authority. I became aware of my posture. At some point during his account, my shoulders had straightened. My chin had lifted. I wasn't holding tension anymore. I wasn't shrinking. The wine stain on my uniform felt irrelevant. The room that had watched me be labeled damaged now stood in stillness. Not pity, recognition. My father approached slowly. Elena, he said, voice unsteady. Why didn't you tell us? I met his eyes. Because I wasn't allowed to. That was the simple truth. Jessica looked smaller somehow. Not physically, structurally. The foundation she stood on had shifted. And she knew it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. 5 years ago, I walked out of a hospital room with stitches across my back. and a signature on a document that erased the story. Tonight, the story had walked back in on its own, and I was no longer bending to accommodate anyone else's version of it. Jessica recovered fast. I'll give her that. There has to be some confusion, she said, forcing a tight smile, as if this were a minor scheduling error. Classified operations are complex. Sometimes names get crossed. My father stood frozen a few feet away, a crystal glass slipping from his hand and shattering against the marble floor. He didn't even look down. Admiral Sterling didn't blink. There is no confusion, he said calmly. Jessica straightened her posture, shifting back into professional tone. Sir, with respect, I've worked directly with Fleet Command Communications for the past 3 years. I would have been briefed if my own sister were involved in a mission of that magnitude. You were briefed, he replied evenly, on what you were cleared to know. A few officers in the room exchanged looks. They understood that distinction. Jessica exhaled sharply. Then perhaps the recognition process is incomplete. If my sister was involved, that's wonderful. But this public reinterpretation. Sterling raised a hand slightly. That was enough to stop her. He reached into the inside pocket of his dress jacket and withdrew a small navy case, the kind used for medals. The ballroom went silent again. He opened it slowly. Inside rested a medal most civilians wouldn't recognize at first glance, but every senior officer in that room did. A classified commendation variant. Rarely issued, almost never public. Gasps moved through the crowd, not loud, but unmistakable. This was authorized 5 years ago, Sterling said. Deferred from ceremony under operational confidentiality. He stepped closer to me and held it in both hands, for extraordinary valor in direct protection of United States naval assets under imminent threat. My father looked like he was trying to process an entirely new version of reality. Jessica swallowed. If that's real, why was it never documented publicly? Because public documentation would have exposed the method of defense, Sterling replied, which would have compromised future operations. He closed the case and handed it to me. I didn't look at it right away. Instead, I felt the weight of it in my palm. 5 years condensed into a single object. Then Sterling reached into a leather folder handed to him by one of his aides. He removed several sealed documents. Medical reports, he said evenly. Surgical summaries. Impact analysis. He didn't hand them to me. He handed them to my father. My father's hands trembled as he took them. The fragmentation patterns align precisely with underwater mine detonation at close proximity, Sterling continued. Not self-inflicted injury, not negligence, combat trauma. Jessica's face had lost its color completely. This is inappropriate, she said, voice tight. This is a private family matter being dramatized in a professional setting. Sterling turned to her fully for the first time. Integrity, he said calmly, is never inappropriate. She opened her mouth again. He didn't raise his voice, but the next sentence cut through the room like a blade. You're proud of your press briefings, he asked. She didn't answer. You're proud of your headlines, your narrative control. Her jaw clenched. They are worthless, he said evenly, if compared to the silence your sister maintained to protect the fleet. The word worthless echoed harder than any insult she'd thrown at me. He took one step closer. You polished a story, he continued. She prevented a funeral. No one in the room moved. Jessica looked around, searching for support. There was none. And then the ballroom doors opened again. This time, the sound was heavier. 2 uniformed members of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service stepped inside, accompanied by a military police officer. They moved with quiet authority. The music system was already off. There was nothing to mask the shift. Jessica turned toward them, confusion flashing across her face. What is this? She demanded. One of the agents spoke clearly. Jessica Reed. Yes. You are under investigation for misappropriation of government funds and fraudulent expense allocation connected to official communications budgets. Her face went blank. That's absurd, she said instantly. All expenditures were approved. Not when redirected to personal credit accounts, the agent replied. The words landed. My father looked from them to Jessica in disbelief. This has to be some mistake, he said. The agent continued calmly. Financial tracing indicates government communication funds were rerouted through vendor contracts tied to private lifestyle charges. Jessica shook her head. I manage allocations. That's part of my role. You exceeded your authorization, the agent said. The room understood now. The lifestyle, the debt, the urgency, the pressure to liquidate the beach house. Jessica's eyes snapped to mine. You did this, she whispered. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't forge your spending reports, I said evenly. Her breathing quickened. You had no access. I didn't need access. That part was true. When the creditor called me about the fraudulent cosign, I didn't just demand documentation. I forwarded everything to someone who knew how to follow money properly, quietly, without headlines. Sterling didn't look surprised. He looked prepared. The agent stepped closer. You'll need to come with us, one said. Jessica pulled back. In front of everyone, yes. That word carried the same weight she'd tried to use against me earlier. Public, visible, unavoidable. My mother began crying softly. My father didn't speak. The agents guided Jessica toward the exit. She didn't fight, but she didn't look defeated either. She looked shocked that consequences had weight. When the doors closed behind them, the ballroom stood suspended in silence. Sterling turned back to me. There will be formal proceedings, he said quietly, but that is no longer your burden. I nodded once. My father stepped forward slowly. Elena, he began, voice uneven. Why didn't you ever tell us about any of this? I looked at him. Would you have listened? I asked. He didn't answer, because he knew. The room began to shift, conversations restarting cautiously, but something fundamental had changed. The hierarchy had cracked. Sterling glanced at me again. You left the service quietly, he said. What have you been doing since I slipped the metal case into my pocket? Fixing engines, I said. He gave me a look that suggested he knew that wasn't the whole story. It scales, I added. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I don't work alone, I said. The marina is just one site. My father looked confused. What do you mean? I met his eyes calmly. I own the largest independent ship repair company in Southern California, I said. Through a holding representative. Silence again. You're joking, he said. I don't joke about revenue. Jessica had once called me a mechanic like it was an insult. Turns out mechanics understand systems better than most, and some of us don't need headlines to build empires. I woke up before sunrise and drove straight to the beach without checking my phone. The air was cooler than it had been all week. The kind of quiet morning San Diego only gives you if you show up early enough. I parked near the same stretch of sand where everything had started and walked down without shoes. This time I wasn't wearing long sleeves, just a dark tank top. The scars across my back caught the early light. Pale lines against tan skin, uneven, permanent. I didn't try to hide them. I stood facing the water, hands in my pockets, listening to the waves roll in and pull back out. No music, no speeches, no curated narratives, just water. Footsteps approached behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew who it was. My mother's voice came first, soft, already breaking. Elena. I turned slowly. They looked older than they had the night before. My father's posture had changed. Not collapsed, just less certain. My mother's eyes were red. We've been trying to call you, she said. I know. We needed to see you. You are. They both glanced at my back. This time they didn't look away quickly. My father cleared his throat. We didn't know, I know. That's not an excuse, he added quickly. But it's the truth. I held his gaze. You didn't ask, I said. He didn't deny it. My mother stepped closer. We thought you were protecting yourself. We thought you were embarrassed. Jessica always said a lot of things. She nodded weakly. We were proud of her, my father said. She was visible, successful, it was easy to see. And I wasn't. He swallowed. No, he admitted. The honesty would have meant something years ago. Now it just felt late. We were wrong, my mother said, tears sliding down her face. We let her narrative become the only one in the house. You let it become the truth, I corrected gently. My father looked at the ocean, then back at me. I spent my career believing service was defined by rank and recognition, he said. Last night proved I missed something. Service isn't loud, I said. It's consistent. He nodded slowly. I should have defended you, he said. Yes, I replied. No anger in my voice. Just fact. When she mocked you, he continued, voice tightening when she questioned your discharge. I should have stopped it. Yes. My mother stepped forward and touched my arm lightly. Can you forgive us? There it was, the question everyone asks when consequences show up. I looked at both of them carefully. Forgiveness is simple to say and complicated to live. I'm not angry anymore, I said. Relief flickered across their faces. But that doesn't mean nothing happened. They both went still. We were blinded, my mother said. By her success, by appearances. We thought you were drifting. I was rebuilding, I said. My father looked down at the sand. We assumed you left because you couldn't handle it, he admitted. I know, and we treated you like you failed. Yes. The waves rolled in behind me, steady and indifferent. My father stepped closer. Elena, he said quietly. We're asking for another chance, not to fix the past, but to be better moving forward. I studied his face. For the first time in my life, he wasn't speaking as a colonel. He was speaking as a man who realized he'd misjudged his own daughter. But growth doesn't erase damage. When I needed you, I said calmly, you weren't neutral. He flinched slightly. You weren't confused. You chose a side. Silence. You chose the side that was loud, I continued. The one with headlines. The one that made you look successful as parents. My mother began crying again. That's not fair, she started. It is, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When Jessica mocked me in front of people, I continued, you stood there. My father's jaw tightened. When she called me weak, I said you agreed. He didn't deny it. When she questioned my integrity, I added, you defended her. The wind shifted slightly off the water. I looked directly at both of them. When I needed my parents to protect me from cruelty inside my own family, I said clearly, you chose to protect the glow around her instead. They stood still. Tears, regret, recognition. But here's the part you need to understand, I continued. My voice stayed even. I don't need that glow anymore. They blinked. I don't need validation from this family to know who I am, I said. I don't need applause. I don't need correction, and I definitely don't need to compete for approval. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. I spent 5 years thinking, maybe if I worked harder, earned more, proved more. You'd see me differently, I admitted. Last night showed me something, what my mother whispered. I don't have to prove anything to you. The wind lifted a strand of her hair across her face. We want to be in your life, she said quietly. You can be, I replied, but not the way it was. They both looked at me carefully. No more dismissing what you don't understand, I said. No more ranking your children based on visibility. No more silence when one of us crosses a line. My father nodded slowly. I can do that, he said. I hope so. My mother squeezed my hand. We love you, I know. That was true. Love isn't the same as fairness. They stood there for another moment, uncertain. Will you come to dinner this week? My father asked carefully. I'll think about it, I said. It wasn't punishment, it was boundary. They both understood. After a few more quiet words, they walked back toward the parking lot. I stayed. The sun had risen higher now, catching the scars across my back fully. They didn't look like damage. They looked like history. And for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of how my family defined me. I was standing exactly where I chose to stand. Not hidden, not explained, just steady. I signed the final transfer papers at a small legal office overlooking the marina, not at my parents' house. The beach property that my grandfather left to us no longer carried the Reed name. It now belonged to a veterans foundation that specializes in housing and rehabilitation for service members with permanent injuries. Adaptive access, long-term care support, job retraining programs, real work, not symbolic ribbon cuttings. The director of the foundation sat across from me reviewing the documents one last time. This is a substantial donation, she said carefully. Are you certain? Yes. You could sell it privately and generate significant return. I've generated enough return. That part wasn't arrogance, it was math. The marina location people think is my main operation is just one of 6 facilities. Ship repair, retrofit structural rebuilds, commercial contracts, government bids, quiet growth, clean books, no press releases, no gala speeches, just delivery. We finalized the transfer with signatures and a handshake. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. Maybe, I replied. He believed in utility. Outside, the ocean air felt sharper. I drove straight to the docks. My boat was waiting. It's not flashy. 38 feet. Reinforced hull. Engine system I designed myself. After too many years watching military equipment fail. Under pressure, it wasn't built to sustain. Efficiency over shine. Before I untied the lines, my phone buzzed. News alert. Jessica Reed formally charged with federal fraud and misappropriation of defense communication funds. There were photos. The same media that once quoted her now analyzed her. Headlines shifted fast. From rising communications strategist to ethics investigation expands. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt inevitability. When you build a life around perception, the collapse is always public. My parents had issued a short statement distancing themselves from individual financial decisions. No one likes proximity to scandal. The Reed name, once delivered with emphasis, now circulated with caution. Pride is loud until it isn't. I stepped onto the deck and started the engine. The sound was steady, controlled, no hesitation in ignition. As I guided the boat out of the marina, I thought about how much of my life had been defined by what I didn't say. Silence to protect classified operations. Silence to avoid humiliating my family. Silence to prevent escalation. There's strength in silence, but there's also strength in choosing when to stop being quiet. The coastline grew smaller behind me. For years I believed my scars were something to manage socially, something to explain or conceal depending on the audience. Now I understood something different. They were proof of survival, proof of decision-making under pressure, proof that when the moment demanded commitment, I didn't retreat. People who have never stood in freezing water with live explosives wired beneath them love to define what strength looks like. They call visibility bravery. They call volume leadership. They call applause validation. They're wrong. Strength is consistency when no one is watching. Integrity is action when no recognition follows. I adjusted course slightly and let the boat cut clean through open water. Jessica will face trial. She will answer questions without a curated script. And maybe for the first time, she will understand what it feels like to stand exposed without narrative control. My parents will have to sit with the reality that success measured only in headlines collapses quickly. They will have to rebuild their identity without ranking their children. That part isn't my responsibility anymore. I don't hate them. I don't need to. Distance is sometimes cleaner than revenge. The sun was higher now, reflecting off the water in steady patterns. I stood at the helm in a tank top, whined against my shoulders, scars fully visible. No shame, no explanation, just history. There's something else I've learned. Scars are not evidence of weakness. They are maps of battles you survived. They are reminders of choices made when retreat was easier. They are proof that you were there. Don't ever allow people who have never stepped into your battlefield to define your value. Not your family, not your colleagues, not the crowd. If you've ever been underestimated because you chose silence over spectacle, I want to hear from you. If you believe integrity matters more than rank, more than image, more than applause, then subscribe and share your story below. Because the world doesn't need more polished narratives. It needs more people who stand steady when the tide rises. I didn't stay quiet for 5 years because I was broken. I stayed quiet because I understood the assignment. There's a difference. A lot of people watched what happened at that gala and said the same thing. Why didn't you just tell your family earlier? It sounds simple, it sounds logical, but strength isn't always loud, and discipline isn't always visible. When I signed that non-disclosure agreement after the operation, I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting sailors who would never know my name. I was protecting a system that only works if certain details never leave the room. Silence in that context wasn't weakness, it was structure. The problem is in everyday life, people don't understand that kind of silence. They assume if you don't defend yourself publicly, you don't have a defense. That's wrong. There are 3 kinds of silence. The first kind is fear. That's when you don't speak because you're afraid of losing approval, comfort, or belonging. I've been there too. When Jessica mocked me at family dinners years ago, I stayed quiet because pushing back would have made me difficult. That kind of silence shrinks you. The second kind is strategy. That's when you don't speak because timing matters more than volume. That's the silence I carried in uniform. You don't broadcast your position when you're still in the field. The third kind is discipline. That's when you could speak, you could expose everything, you could correct the narrative immediately, but you choose not to because the mission is bigger than your ego. For 5 years, I chose discipline. But here's the part people miss. Silence only works if you control it. The moment someone else starts using your silence as evidence against you, it stops being discipline and starts becoming a liability. That's the line I had to learn. When Jessica turned my scars into gossip, when she questioned my integrity publicly, my silence stopped protecting something bigger. It started protecting her comfort. And that's not the same thing. If you're watching this and you're the quiet one in your family, the quiet one at work, the quiet one in the room, ask yourself something honestly. Are you silent because you're strong? Or are you silent because you're afraid of confrontation? There's no shame in admitting the difference, but you need to know which one you're operating from. If your silence is discipline, keep building, keep stacking skills, keep improving your financial position, keep strengthening your body and mind. Let your foundation grow quietly. If your silence is fear, you need to adjust, because people will always test the quiet person first. Here's what I've learned. Not everyone deserves your story. You don't owe detailed explanations of your trauma to relatives who only ask out of curiosity. You don't owe career justification to people who don't pay your bills. You don't owe vulnerability to those who have already shown you they don't handle it with respect. Information is leverage. Once you give it away, you don't control how it's used. That doesn't mean isolate yourself. It means be selective. Another thing, stop documenting every win. We live in a culture that rewards visibility. Promotions get posted, new houses get posted, relationships get posted, even gym progress gets posted. But attention is not the same as achievement. If your entire sense of validation depends on other people reacting to your progress, you will always be emotionally unstable. Build something that doesn't require applause. Build a skill that can't be taken away because someone unfollowed you. Build financial literacy. Build emotional regulation. Build physical endurance. Those don't trend, but they compound. There's also a practical side to this. If you are working on something important, whether that's paying off debt, changing careers, leaving a toxic relationship, starting a business, consider keeping it quiet until it's stable. Announcing goals feels good. Executing goals feels better. And here's something most people don't like to hear. The loudest person in the room is usually the least secure. Jessica needed constant reinforcement because her identity was tied to perception. When perception cracked, she had nothing underneath it. I had something underneath. That's the difference. You don't need everyone to know what you're building. You just need to know. But remember this clearly. Silence should never cost you your dignity. If someone is actively misrepresenting you at work, in your family, in your social circle, you have every right to correct it. Calmly, clearly, without drama. Correction doesn't require rage. It requires clarity. I didn't scream at the gala. I didn't insult Jessica. I stood still. And when the truth came out, it didn't need embellishment. That's the power of preparation. If you live clean, if you build honestly, if your books are in order, if your story is consistent, exposure becomes your ally. So here's the lesson I want you to take with you. Silence is power when you choose it. It becomes weakness only when you let someone else weaponize it. Be quiet while you build. Be vocal when your integrity is attacked. Know the difference. And most importantly, don't confuse lack of recognition with lack of value. Some of the strongest people you will ever meet are the ones who did what needed to be done without asking for credit. If that's you, keep going. Just make sure your silence serves you, not the people who benefit from it. After everything came out, people expected one of two reactions from me, either total forgiveness or total exile. We're conditioned to believe those are the only two options when family crosses a line. You either be the bigger person and pretend it didn't hurt, or you burn the bridge and make a statement. There's a third option, structure. When my parents came to the beach asking for another chance, they weren't wrong to ask, but I wasn't wrong to pause. Forgiveness is personal, access is earned. Those are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse boundaries with punishment. They think if you say no to family, you're betraying them. If you reduce access, you're being cold. If you stop tolerating disrespect, you're dramatic. That's backward. Boundaries are not betrayal. They are clarity. For years, I allowed myself to be compared, minimized, and questioned inside my own home. I told myself it was easier to absorb it than to escalate it. I told myself that keeping peace was mature. It wasn't mature. It was misdirected loyalty. There's a dangerous belief in many families: blood equals immunity. It doesn't. If a coworker spoke to me the way Jessica did at that gala, I would have filed a formal complaint. If a stranger mocked my medical history publicly, I would have shut it down immediately. But because it was my sister, I tolerated it longer than I should have. Because it was my father, I let dismissive comments slide. Because it was my mother, I accepted, She didn't mean it like that as resolution. Family doesn't get a permanent pass to shrink you. Here's something most people don't like to admit. Sometimes you're the understanding one in the family. You're the calm one, the stable one, the one who doesn't cause drama, the one who absorbs tension so others don't have to feel it. And slowly that becomes your assigned role. You become the emotional shock absorber. That role feels noble at first. Then it becomes exhausting. If you're always the one adjusting, you're not in a balanced system. You're in a hierarchy. After the truth came out, my parents wanted to repair things quickly. Dinners, conversations, emotional apologies. I didn't reject them, but I changed the structure. I no longer engage in conversations where my life is dissected for comparison. I no longer attend gatherings where subtle ranking happens. I no longer defend my decisions to people who aren't living with the consequences. That's not revenge. That's recalibration. And here's the key part. I didn't shout about my boundaries. I demonstrated them. I shortened visits. I redirected conversations. I ended discussions calmly when they crossed a line. No became a full sentence. Not angry, not sarcastic, just firm. You don't need to justify every boundary. The moment you over-explain, you hand control back to the person you're trying to create space from. There's another misconception worth addressing. Setting boundaries does not mean you stop loving someone. It means you stop allowing behaviors that damage you. You can love your parents and still refuse to participate in old dynamics. You can love your sibling and still decline involvement in their chaos. You can care about someone and still remove access. Access is privilege, not obligation. If someone repeatedly minimizes your achievements, mocks your pain, or weaponizes your past, you are not required to offer unlimited emotional availability. And here's something practical. If you are financially dependent on someone, your boundaries will always feel fragile. Independence strengthens boundaries. That doesn't mean you need to be wealthy. It means you need stability, a steady income, a place to live that you control. Savings, options. The more options you have, the easier it is to say no without fear. When I told my parents I didn't need their glow anymore, it wasn't emotional. It was structural. I didn't rely on their approval, their money, or their network. That changes everything. If you're in a situation where you can't yet enforce boundaries safely, focus first on building stability, education, skill development, financial literacy, emotional resilience. Boundaries without backup are just wishes. Boundaries with structure are policy, and policy doesn't require permission. There's also something important about tone. You don't need rage to set limits. Rage feels powerful in the moment, but it often gives the other person a reason to dismiss you as unstable. Calm firmness is harder to argue with. When I told my father he chose the glow over me, I didn't yell. I didn't insult him. I stated a fact. Facts are difficult to refute. That's how you shift power without escalating chaos. Here's a test for you. When you leave interactions with someone, do you feel smaller or steady? If you consistently feel smaller, something needs to change. You are not required to keep earning a seat at a table you were born into. Respect is not inherited. It's practiced. And if it's not practiced, access changes. That's not betrayal, that's adulthood. The strongest people I've met are not the ones who dominate conversations. They're the ones who know exactly where their limits are and enforce them without apology. So if you're struggling with guilt about pulling back from someone who shares your last name, hear this clearly. You are allowed to grow beyond roles assigned to you as a child. You are allowed to step out of comparison. You are allowed to protect your peace, even if it disappoints someone. And you are absolutely allowed to love people from a distance that keeps you intact. Boundaries don't destroy families. Unaddressed disrespect does. Choose structure, choose clarity, and don't confuse self-respect with disloyalty. While people were busy debating my scars, I was building infrastructure. That's the part no one talks about. For 5 years, most of my extended family thought I ended up at a small marina fixing engines because I couldn't handle military pressure. They saw grease on my hands and assumed decline. They didn't see the contracts. They didn't see the spreadsheets. They didn't see the ownership structure. And that was intentional. There's something powerful about being underestimated. It buys you time. Jessica built visibility. I built systems. Visibility is fragile. Systems are scalable. When I left the service, I didn't spiral. I assessed. I asked one simple question. What do I know that most people don't? I understood marine systems under stress. I understood what fails when equipment is pushed beyond design. I understood response time redundancy, structural reinforcement. So I started small, one repair dock, one used lift, 2 hired technicians. I reinvested everything. No flashy upgrades, no personal lifestyle expansion, no sudden change in zip code. I studied business law at night. Not for a degree, for leverage. I learned contract negotiation, insurance structures, liability shields, tax strategy. None of that is glamorous. All of it compounds. Here's the truth most people ignore. If you want freedom, you need control over your income. Not status, not followers, not applause. Income. I didn't want to win arguments at family dinners. I wanted to remove myself from ever needing approval to make decisions, so I built quietly. And here's something I want you to understand clearly. Comparison will slow you down faster than failure. Jessica's life looked impressive. Travel, media mentions, command access, exclusive events. If I had measured myself against her highlight reel, I would have felt behind. But I wasn't building a highlight reel. I was building margin. Margin in finances, margin in reputation, margin in optionality. When you build for stability instead of attention, you move differently. You negotiate differently. You walk away from bad deals faster. You don't panic when someone disapproves. Let me give you something practical. If you feel underestimated right now, do not respond emotionally. Respond structurally. Improve your skill stack. Ask yourself, what can I learn in the next 12 months that increases my earning power by 20%? Not overnight, 12 months. Skills compound like interest. Emotional reactions don't. Another thing, understand money, not just earning it, managing it. I've met highly intelligent people who sabotage themselves because they don't understand debt structures, credit leverage, or tax obligations. Jessica didn't fail because she wasn't smart. She failed because she confused access with ownership. She had proximity to power, but not control over it. If your lifestyle depends on maintaining an image, you are vulnerable. If your lifestyle is funded by assets that generate consistently, you are stable. Those are not the same thing. When I revealed that I owned the largest independent ship repair operation in the region, it wasn't to embarrass anyone. It was to remove the last false narrative about me. Failed mechanic. No, strategic operator. And here's the part most people overlook. I didn't build that company to prove anyone wrong. I built it because I needed direction after the military. If your motivation is revenge, you will burn out. If your motivation is structure, you will scale. You don't need to announce every phase of growth. In fact, don't. Early exposure invites early opinions. Opinions drain energy. Energy should be spent on execution. There's also discipline in staying boring. For years, I drove the same truck, lived in the same modest place, wore the same work clothes. People underestimate consistency. They assume no visible change means no growth. Meanwhile, I was acquiring docks, upgrading equipment, signing municipal contracts, quietly. If you want to win permanently, you need 3 things. First, skill depth. Be so competent in your domain that you can't be easily replaced. Second, financial literacy. Understand cash flow. Understand liability. Understand risk. Third, emotional control. You cannot build long-term stability if you react to every slight. When Jessica insulted me publicly, it would have been easy to explode. But emotion is expensive. Control is profitable. Here's something else I've learned. The world will test you before it respects you. If you stay consistent under pressure, your reputation compounds the same way your skills do. People begin to associate your name with reliability, and reliability pays. Not always immediately, but permanently. I don't need to dominate rooms. I need to control outcomes. There's a difference. If you are currently the quiet one in your circle, the one others assume is behind, let them think that. Use the time. Use the underestimation. Build assets, build discipline, build systems. And when the moment comes to reveal what you've built, let it be clean. No bragging, no revenge speech, just clarity. Success isn't loud, it's sustainable. And sustainable always outlasts spectacle. You don't need applause to be powerful, you need structure. You don't need validation to move forward. You need direction. And you don't need to win arguments. You need to win your life. So build quietly, execute consistently, and when you finally step into open water, make sure it's because you chose to, not because someone pushed you there.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.